Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, welcome to today's Defending Our Forests from Trump's Logging Executive Orders and the Fight for Public Lands. My name's Casey, and I'll be your facilitator and panelist moderator today. We have folks from Oregon Wild joining us here who are all across the spectrum of the work that they do. And I'm gonna start. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure this out still. What we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about first what Oregon Wild is. Second, what the Trump administration is doing to really mess with our environment and the spaces that we all love. And then we're going to hear about specific types of advocacy that you can do that are actually going to be effective. So, who is Oregon Wild? For the past 50 years, Oregon Wild has been protecting and restoring Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters all across the state. But I would be remiss without noting that the place that we call Oregon was stolen by force from the indigenous peoples who inhabited it, whose descendants comprise the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon, as well as tribes in neighboring states, and indigenous people who are not members of federally recognized nor federally not recognized tribes. And that land includes our public lands, which you can see on this screen, but you can also see that it's our cities and our farms and our ranches and our homes and our businesses. They're all located on lands that were never given to us or to our government. The indigenous inhabitants of what we call Oregon are still here among us today. They are our ancestors and our neighbors and our friends. And in these very cruel and chaotic times that the Trump administration is inflicting upon all of us, we lift up tribal nations and their sovereignty, and we send thanks to the people who came before us. And now back to the slides here. So if you bought tickets for the raffle, the winners will be drawn at random after the presentation. And then in our emails out to you, the follow-up will let you know if you won one of the prizes. So stay tuned for that. A video of the webcast will be emailed out tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow, along with resources that we talk about here and links to important additional resources. It will also be available on our YouTube channel and at our website, oregonwild.org. So feel free to share that. And if you have questions, I mentioned, but some folks were still rolling in. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we'll make sure that we answer them at the end. Now, we'll note that this is a map of Oregon. The green color is national forests. The brown color is Bureau of Land Management managed lands. And the bright yellow is Oregon State Forests. All these lands are managed on behalf of Oregonians and people around America. It is important to note that only 2.5 million of the 63 million acres in Oregon are actually wilderness, which is the highest level of protection that land can have in the US. And you can see on this that our lands are very diverse, right? From high desert and basin and range to really wet forest, conifer forest on the coast, and farmland in the middle there. Those lands are mostly unprotected, but they're precious to all of us. And now I'd like to introduce just briefly the folks who are with us, my colleagues at Oregon Wild. So Lauren Anderson, who's our Climate Forest Program Manager, will help us make sense of the Trump chaos and his destructive agenda for public lands. Phoenix Johnson, who is a communications associate, will talk about social media advocacy and wrap us up. And Lauren, if you want to wave, and Phoenix, if you want to wave, there you go. Victoria Wingel, who is our forest and climate, thank you, campaigner, will talk about writing letters to the editor, plus emailing and calling elected officials. And then finally, Sammy Godlove, the Central Oregon field coordinator, will talk about attending town hall meetings and meeting with elected officials. Before Lauren gets started, I just want to note that these are very hard times. I mean, I can't even put a big enough emphasis on that. My neighbors and friends are scared. All across the United States, people are scared and don't know what's happening. And we're going to share a little bit of what we understand is happening and how to take action. And it will feel daunting, it'll feel scared. You can feel what you want to feel, but know that we are here with you and we're working on these things alongside you. With that, I'll hand it over to Lauren, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Casey. Hello, everyone. So for my part of the presentation tonight, I am going to go over the two logging executive orders, and I'm going to make sure that we don't forget about Congress, what they've been up to. So I'm going to talk about the Fix Our Forests Act. And I'm going to go over some of the concerning changes to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which is one of our bedrock environmental laws. And last but not least, I'm going to go over what all the staff cuts at federal agencies mean for public lands. Next slide. And I'm going to try not to use acronyms during this presentation, but I apologize in advance for when I do. So there were two executive orders that came out a few weeks ago. The first executive order frames logging, next slide, as the primary purpose of federal forest management. It frames increasing timber production as a matter of national and economic security and aims to reverse any federal policies that have prevented the ability to fully exploit our domestic timber supply. The only good thing I can say about this executive order is that it's not trying to be sneaky. It's not trying to hide the ball. They are very clearly going after logging and timber supply off of federal lands. Usually, when industry puts forward a policy like this, it's done under the guise of a forest health treatment goal or reducing wildfire risk, like the Fix Our Forests Act. But this executive order is quite direct in what it's trying to do. Next slide. So one big section of this directive is focused on weakening environmental review. So the agencies have been directed to take action to undermine the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act to boost logging as much as possible. So within the first 30 days, they must issue guidance to boost logging and propose legislation to expand logging authority. Within the first 60 days, they must develop a strategy to speed up Endangered Species Act review for logging projects. And within 90 days, they must propose annual timber targets in millions of board feet. This next one is very specific. They must complete the white bark pine range-wide programmatic consultation under the Endangered Species Act. So this one is specific, but the white bark pine was listed under the Endangered Species Act in 2022. And this process has been ongoing for 3 years. So I suspect industry just wants to get it over with so that they can move on to the next step. Within the first 180 days, they must consider adopting categorical exclusions that other agencies have adopted. And categorical exclusions are basically just a tool for ensuring that they don't have to jump through as many hoops with the public in order to start these projects on the ground. It's not good that the agencies can adopt each other's. Both agencies have bad categorical exclusion policies, and so just being able to interchange them is not going to be helpful. Within 280 days, they must consider adopting NEPA exemptions for thinning and salvage logging. So more logging. Next slide. Another aspect of this is focused on undoing existing environmental protections. So the agencies are generally directed to eliminate any existing policy that creates an undue burden on logging. Undue burden is not defined, so that means anything that is remotely annoying or inconvenient to logging. Next slide. This next part is focused on the Endangered Species Act. They are directed to use emergency provisions to speed up Section 7 consultation for federal logging projects. Section 7 under the ESA, Endangered Species Act, requires federal agencies to ensure that their actions are not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of any endangered or threatened species. It also says that the Endangered Species Committee is directed to identify obstacles to logging and figure out how to increase logging. So the Endangered Species Committee is also commonly referred to as the God Squad because of their ability to essentially give permission to activities that will drive species to extinction. So it's a big deal. The administration is basically setting up a scenario where it could declare the endangered species. And for example, here in Oregon, that's like coho salmon, northern spotted owl, marbled murrelets, will lose protections and be driven towards extinction in pursuit of logging. Next slide. So unfortunately, there were two executive orders. The only good thing that can be said for the second one is that it's shorter than the first. Um, so the first section of this one describes wood products as vital to national defense, asserts other countries are dumping lumber on the United States, and establishes a policy of ensuring a secure domestic timber supply. Section 2 directs the Secretary of Commerce to investigate the effects of timber imports on national security. And Section 3 directs the Secretary of Commerce to submit a report presenting findings about the threats that timber imports pose to national security. And another aspect of this report that's concerning is that it requires recommendations for incentives to increase production on federal lands and permitting reforms specifically. So in summary, the goal here is industrial logging all over our public lands and valuing that higher than the other values that we care about, like clean water and clean air. Directs federal agencies to find ways to weaken key environmental protections under NEPA and the ESA. So it's bad news. But we can't forget about Congress. So the really bad bill in Congress that we've been paying attention to now is called Fix Our Forests. Fix Our Forests Act, unlike the executive orders, is trying to be sneaky about what it's doing. It's a logging bill attempting to disguise itself as a legitimate wildfire strategy. It's a direct attack on both the public's ability to engage in management of public lands, and many other aspects of it are problematic. There are better options out there when it comes to wildfire policy. For example, the Community Protection and Wildfire Resilience Act would provide funding to design and implement new plans with community members, with first responders, with relevant state agencies to make the types of investments needed to keep people and property safe. The Fix Our Forest Act, however, is attempting to create categorical exclusions for projects up to 15 square miles. And for folks in Oregon, that's the size of Corvallis or Springfield. So you would be able to see these projects from space. It contains many direct attacks on NEPA and the Endangered Species Act. Next. So the point of this slide is just to show that there is a coordinated plan at play here. The end goal is to fast track logging and ensure our environmental policies do not get in the way. There is a lot of similarity between these executive orders and the Fix Our Forest Act. If the Fix Our Forest Act were to pass and become law, then it would basically cement many aspects of the executive orders, which is very problematic. Fix Our Forest Act has passed the House and is into the Senate now. So that's where it's at in this process. Okay, let's talk about NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. So NEPA does not have a built-in communications plan, unfortunately. When you think of our other critical environmental laws like the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, it's pretty self-explanatory why those laws are really important. NEPA is extremely important as well, but they really dropped the ball in choosing the name on it. The Council of Environmental Quality is also a really big deal. It was the big umbrella federal agency that gave all the other federal agencies direction on environmental policy, including NEPA implementation. These NEPA regulations were withdrawn, unfortunately, and they were meant to meet the statute's twin goals of informed decision-making by federal agencies and informed public participation in the decision-making process. So these two goals are intertwined and are meant to inform each other going forward. So the statute is still in place. It was just the oversight that CEQ provided that was removed. And the implications are pretty serious about this. Without CEQ's NEPA regulations, there's going to be much less consistency between agencies in terms of public involvement, and the scope and depth of environmental analysis is going to be much poorer. Next slide. So without CEQ's most recent NEPA regulations, agencies won't need to consider environmental justice, climate impacts, or traditional ecological knowledge. All of those were put forward under the Biden administration. There is some good news, though. Congress updated NEPA in 2023 to add language requiring agencies to ensure professional integrity, including scientific integrity. This is especially important in the public lands context because it requires the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service to make science-based decisions. Previously, that scientific integrity component was just part of the CEQ regulations and would have been lost as well. But it's in statute, so it's safe. Next slide. So what does this mean? Those CEQ regulations applied to over 80 agencies in the federal government, and removing them is removing the overarching direction, and there'll be less government transparency as a result, less opportunities for the public to get involved, more project delays, and poor environmental outcomes. Next slide. All right. So last bit of bad news to go over are the federal agencies that manage our public lands, including U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, have been losing a lot of staff that have been illegally fired by the Trump administration. And these are just huge numbers. And with all of these firings, what we're losing is a ton of scientific expertise, institutional knowledge of how these agencies work. And we're also losing a lot of really specific knowledge of special places on the ground. These people who worked at the agencies knew the areas they worked in really well. And so that is not something we're going to be able to recover easily. Next slide. So all of these terrible things come together. Are coming together very quickly and very hard to keep track of. But there is an end goal associated with all of these. And when you think, and it is basically to profit off of our public lands in as effective a way as they possibly can achieve during the next 4 years. So we talk about privatizing public lands, and that involves like selling public lands, which is absolutely a risk during this administration. But there's also a real risk of privatizing the management of our public lands. And so with all the staff cuts and all the firings, what we're probably going to see is management shift into private companies. And private companies are going to be able to avoid a lot of the stricter environmental review processes and go for the most valuable trees on the landscape and log those as quickly as possible over the next 4 years. So it's not a very cheerful thought, but it is fairly clear what their goal is with all of this, and we're already seeing some of that on the land. A few takeaways before I hand it over to the next part. This stuff is meant to feel overwhelming. It's part of their strategy to make you feel helpless and make you feel like you don't know how to fight back and you can't keep up with everything that's going on. This was the really depressing part of the presentation, and the next part is going to be much better and more uplifting. We're going to focus on how you can get engaged and keep up with all the bad stuff that's happening. So that's it for me, and I will hand it over to who's next.
I'm next. As a reminder, I'm Casey. Thank you so much, Lauren. It is scary and it's overwhelming to see how much the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress and agency staff led by both Elon Musk and Trump um, are attempting to do. A lot of the things that they've attempted to do have already been declared illegal by courts in the United States. And I think that's really important to remember is that the president saying that something is doesn't make it so. And that's a powerful thing for all of us to remember. I think it's powerful for me. But here at Oregon Wild, we work every day in, I think, and I believe, very effective ways of advocating for special places. So knowing where to plug in and where to have influence is a really important part of that. And we'll go through specific ways here, but especially speaking to Congress, working with and replying to agencies, really engaging with the Oregon State Legislature and then engaging with Oregon statewide elected officials is a really important part for us and for you to work on. As an example, we have both Governor Tina Kotek and we have Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield. Attorney General Rayfield has been very active at joining onto and filing lawsuits against the Trump administration, and frankly, I'm very proud of that. And I hope that we can all support them in that effort. But what specifically Oregon Wild has been doing is we've been doing a lot of what we've been doing in the past. That's like educating Congress, working on proactive land protection bills. So very proactive work. We're commenting technical comments on timber sales and forest management plans. As an example, the Bureau of Land Management will begin a timber sale process. And through NEPA, as Lauren talked about, there'll be a public comment opportunity on specific timber sales. Forest management plans are a much larger thing. For those of you who've been following our work on the Northwest Forest Plan Amendment, that's an example of it. Or the Blue Mountain Forest Plan revisions, another one from the east side of Oregon. And then there's defending public lands and forests, and that's really using the legal processes that are rooted in federal laws like NEPA. And so that's suing the pants off of them. Then they're showing up in what I think of as privileged spaces. So spaces that we only can get access to because we know what's happening, we know people who are involved, and we know to insert ourselves into those. And that's the places where there probably are usually only lobbyists and elected officials, or lobbyists and state agency or federal agency staff. We insert ourselves into those spaces and show up and provide comments and really challenge people. And then lastly, Oregon Wild does a lot of work in supporting others. So whether that's organizations or individuals throughout Oregon and the country, amplifying grassroots efforts, supporting civil rights organizations, and then really building community. And by that, I mean building and strengthening the connections between people in disparate interest groups and disparate places that might not understand each other or know how to talk to each other, and building those for times when there's a challenge to our system. And that's really now is the challenge to the system. But now we're going to go through what you can do. What we're going to go over is spreading the word through social media, writing letters to the editor, calling and emailing your elected officials, attending town hall meetings, and meeting with your legislators. And this is everything that's on this list is effective advocacy. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Phoenix Johnson. Phoenix, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Phoenix.
I'm
Is this
excited to
your
be here.
first or your second or third
This
webcast?
is my first talking webinar. I have sat and answered questions, but now everyone gets to hear my voice.
Thank
Hopefully.
you for being here.
Yeah. So, start talking about social media, right? And social media kind of has a mixed reputation. A lot of information can be spread, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So, first, I'm going to talk about why we want to do this. Um, Media consumption is changing and rapidly. you can see right here, the Pew Research Center, 86% of Americans get at least some of their news from a digital device. And whether or not it was the reason they downloaded Instagram or TikTok, you can see 40% of Instagram users and 52% of TikTok users get news from their feed. And I'm sure we're all guilty of it too, right? I've discovered a lot of things of the news cycle because I was sitting on Instagram and it just happened to pop up on my feed. And we're also seeing the rise of a new term I heard, newsfluencer, or science content creators, right? So people like you guys that are passionate about this can start creating this conversation because, to be frank, the Trump area of the world has been a lot better at this. They've been really good about being on social media and about talking to people directly, whether that's on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. So it's an effective tool, and it's also something that you can do from your couch. So we can get into the how now that we're done with the why. So there's lots of campaigns that you can be passionate about. We spent a lot of time today talking about forests, and we'll continue to, but we have a whole page on our website of a bunch of different campaigns we're doing. I also saw in the questions that a lot of you aren't necessarily from Oregon, or used to be in Oregon. And yeah, so thank you for still coming. But check out your local advocacy groups, because a lot of times they'll have similar stuff that we do on the website. You can get involved locally, and also these EOs, just because there's a lot of wood in Oregon doesn't mean that it's not effective elsewhere. Like, this will affect all of our national forests. So try to dig into your local groups. But once you've found that campaign that you're active, that you're really passionate about, just pick one. You don't have to do all of them. How can you engage your community? So there's a lot of platforms that are very visually based. So Instagram and TikTok. There's some that are very text based, like Blue Sky or Twitter. And then there's some that are kind of a mix, like LinkedIn or Facebook. So anything that's really visual, you want a really catchy image. That's why I put this one at the bottom. This is actually someone who entered one of our photo contests. This is a really beautiful catching image, right? But also just people in the outdoors. A lot of the really great posts that do well on Oregon Wild are ones that someone took with their cell phone. You don't need a camera to do that. So if you're someone who has access to wild spaces and can take photos of yourself or the trail while you're hiking in a forest, that's great. If that's not really up your alley, if you're passionate about protecting the great outdoors, but you're not necessarily out in them, anything that's government, that stuff is open domain. So like the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. If you Google like the species, the endangered species that you want to talk about, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife afterwards, that can pop up and you can check whether or not that's open domain, and then you could use it on your Instagram. And then create connection, right, with a personalized text. People are getting their news from social media because they want to feel like they're having a conversation with their friend over the dinner table, right? We want to shift culture, and shifting culture starts in conversations. So it might feel really simple, but simply sharing how much the forest means to you, or how your business relies on public lands, or something along those lines, it connects that this is a real problem that affects you and therefore probably affects people in your community. Being anecdotal and real with it helps engage people. And then don't just give people a problem and be like, well, that sucks. We like to refer to this as a CTA, or a call to action. Give people something they can do. So for instance, me telling you that you can post on social media is my call to action to you. So Lauren went over a lot of heavy stuff. Now we're handing you stuff that you can do about it. And that helps motivate people, and it's going to make this webcast a lot more enjoyable at the end of it. But yeah, so can they call their representative? Can they write a letter to the editor? Can they sign a petition? Can they simply reshare your post to their story? What's something that the people who are reading it, your friends and family and community, can do about this issue that you're passionate about? Next one. Okay, so here's just a few tips and tricks on top of that. So amplifying your message through tagging. So for example, if many of you might have heard about us, Nerdy About Nature, Ross. Hi, Ross. I know you're here. He shared to our story or his story, and tagged us that this was happening tonight. And some of you may have heard about that through him. So tagging us in your stories or your posts lets us repost it and share you, and vice versa. You can repost and share us. or for things that might be really pertinent to any of your representatives or Congress members, like the River Democracy Act. We want Senator Wyden to reintroduce that. So tagging him, that's his tag. If any of you are passionate about rivers, want to follow him on Instagram and tag him, that's his Instagram handle. Politicians, senators, they have public Instagrams and they monitor them. So find them, follow them, and if you see something that they should be doing something about, tag them in it. Let them see it, or at least their staffer who checks their Instagram. Keywords and phrases. So unless your profile is private, if your profile is public, most social media sites use an algorithm to like give you content that it thinks you will like. And it does that by analyzing the text on your photos and videos and in your post. So finding keywords. So this little map on the right that you're seeing, this like word map, this is Oregon Wild's website, our homepage. This is the most common words used on our webpage. So that's just a really good example. Oregon Wild, defending forests, public lands, wildlife, as many of those as you can fit in as possible will help train your algorithm. Think about like your pet dog, train it to who should be seeing your content. Putting a link in your bio or story. If there's an active petition going on, put that link in your bio and refer to it in your posts. And then also don't be like super doom and gloom for your viewers, but also for yourself. There are good news stories out there. And as much as this is a scary time, we're still having wins. We're still like, we've been through hard times and we've had wins then and we're having wins now. And don't forget to amplify that for yourself as much as for others. And then this was sort of a Cliff Notes version. I actually have a whole toolkit together on our website and you guys can scan that QR code. And if you miss scanning this, we are going to send a video of this out so you'll have access to it later. But that goes a little bit more in depth and I give you actual keywords that I use in our posts that you can use in your posts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phoenix. And I will say, I was a county commissioner. It's very small scale compared to Congress and the president, but dang, pressure works. And so that's the like good news story is that you can influence things because pressure works. I'm going to give it a little bit more time. So if you need to, take a photo of the screen, and then I'm going to turn it over to Victoria. Victoria, welcome. And thank you, Phoenix.
Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, thanks so much, Phoenix. So we are very much in the digital age of communication, but our elected officials are still reading traditional media like newspapers. And so it's important that we share our stories there too. So one way that you can do that is by writing and submitting letters to the editor. So, writing letters to the editor is an important and very impactful way to advocate for issues that you care most about. Change is often really slow, so it's critical to keep a very consistent drumbeat over the course of the campaign so that you can keep the public and our decision makers focused on that issue. So, that said, letters to the editor, or LTEs, are a fantastic way to spread influence. Published letters are a great tool to raise awareness on a particular issue with the public, but also to encourage them to take action. So you can use LTEs to call out bad actors and harmful industries, bad projects that you oppose, or bad policies that are moving forward. They also provide an additional line of communication with elected officials and decision makers who are reading these columns to see what their constituents think. So, in that vein, you can use LTEs as an additional pressure point or an accountability tool so that you can oppose bad policy and call out electeds who are supporting them. But on the other side of that, you can also use LTEs to advocate for better alternatives and to thank representatives who are championing those so that you can encourage them to keep fighting and keep up the good work. Next slide. Thank you. So in our activist toolkit that we have up on our website, we're going to share that out after this webcast. But we put together a helpful guide with tips on how you can write a letter to the editor and improve your chances of getting it published. We also included a list of local papers with wide readership and the instructions for how to submit them. So you'll see all of that there. You can use that as a guide as you're writing letters. But for now, I'm going to walk through a couple of the tips that we have in that resource. So it's important to remember that papers get hundreds of submissions every week. So you really want to make sure that your letter stands out. So first, you want to make sure that you have what we call a hook. And what that means is your letter should be timely. If you can connect it to a story that the paper recently ran, you'll have better odds of getting your story published. So, for example, if the paper that you're trying to publish in recently ran a story on climate change or a particular policy proposal that you're familiar with, if you can connect your letter to that topic, they're way more likely to publish it. The next thing, you want to make a big impression in as few words as possible. So most papers have a word limit of 200 to 250 words. So your letter should be short and sweet and really pack a punch. Newspapers really care about what affects the people who buy their newspapers. So speak from the heart about why you care about the particular issue that you're writing about. You also want to localize it as much as you can by mentioning a local story or a special place or maybe a loved one that's been impacted. For example, if you're submitting a letter to the Bend Bulletin, it's really helpful to make the case that what you're writing about will have an impact on the local community in Bend. And my biggest piece of advice, don't hand the opposition the microphone. With such a huge rise in misinformation, I know there's a temptation to go with the myth versus fact approach because we want to tell the truth and set the record straight. But unfortunately, this has actually been shown to be pretty ineffective in changing minds, and it only really serves to repeat that myth and galvanize it in people's minds. So when you're writing, tell your truth, but without repeating that misinformation if possible. And then lastly, if your paper doesn't get published, don't be discouraged. Volume really counts here. And like I said, they're receiving so many of these all the time. Just keep trying. You can try different outlets. You can tweak your submission and try again. Volume really counts here. So keep going. And then a couple of tips for submission. Each paper has their own requirements for submission. So this goes without saying, but make sure you follow their instructions. You don't want your story to be discarded because you missed a step or went over the word count or something like that. So just make sure you're reading what the paper is asking for before you submit. And then following up with the newspaper and asking if they received your letter can increase the chances of getting that published as well. So always good to follow up with the editor. Next slide. Okay, so the next tool in the toolbox is contacting your elected officials directly. So this is another way that you can take action from home every week or every day if you'd like. Our elected officials often gauge the intensity of public opinion on issues based on the method of communication that was used. So, for example, signing petitions are really helpful to show that large numbers of people care about a particular issue, but contacting your representatives through other channels helps to show more authenticity. It gives that opinion a bit more weight and credibility too. So basically, it's really quick and easy to add your name to a petition. In fact, some people might even just read the headline and sign on, but our representatives know that. So if you're taking the time out of your day to write a personal letter or make a phone call, that is really meaningful and highly recommended to do. We're also hearing from congressionals that it's super effective. The phones are ringing off the hooks right now, and it is adding a level of pressure that we haven't seen in a long time. So definitely keep this in your toolbox. But if you haven't done it before, it might seem a little intimidating, but it feels really good once you do it. So in that activist toolkit that I mentioned, we also included a link to find your legislator and look up their contact information. So we made this super simple to do from home. Whether you call or email them, a staffer will make a note of your position and relay it to your legislator. And like the papers, our legislators are getting thousands of phone calls and emails every day. So here you also want to keep your communication really clear and concise so that it's documented and doesn't get lost in all of the other noise. Next slide. So some tips for calling your elected officials. So when you call, you should expect to speak with a staff member, and that's totally great because they will take note of your position. You can leave a voicemail at any hour, or if no one is able to answer the phone, your position is still going to be noted, so you don't actually have to get a hold of them on the phone for this to work. So the phone call will likely last less than 3 minutes. In that time, you want to make sure that you're very clear and concise. You can use the sample phone script that's up on the screen to do that. You'll want to make sure you share your name, the issue you're calling about, and importantly, what action you'd like to see your representative take. And then make sure to thank the staff member for their time. If you get nervous about making phone calls, you can write down your script before you call too. Next slide. Okay. Tips for writing your elected official. So if phone calls aren't your thing and you want to write instead, you can use this up on the screen as an outline for your message. So in your letter, you can expand a little bit more about the issue than you would on the phone, and dive into why it matters to you. I would still recommend keeping it on the shorter side and make your point early on in the message. You could even use the same language in the sample phone script as your introduction and then elaborate on your rationale later in the letter. You also want to make sure that you include your town and your zip code because this is really helpful data for your representative to have. And then to sum up, signing petitions, really important action to take. But if you want to take your advocacy a step further, you can add some additional pressure by contacting your representatives directly by phone or by mail and keeping the pressure on from the outside by publishing in the newspaper as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sammy, who is going to tell you a little bit more about how you can take another step and meet with your reps face to face.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. Sammy, you're on.
Sweet. Thank
And
you.
also, forgive me for assuming that people are from Oregon. I love you from wherever.
All right. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Victoria. So now you've shared stuff to social media. You wrote a letter to the editor. You emailed and called your elected officials. The next two things that you can do might take a little bit more effort, maybe some public speaking as well. But they can really have a very significant impact. And they can also be kind of fun. At least I think they can be kind of fun. So the first thing you can do is attend a town hall. So this is when legislators will come to your community, have kind of a Q&A session with attendees. You can ask them questions, make comments, and they'll answer them. So town halls are a really great way to speak directly to your legislators, to influence them, and to hold them accountable. And also at the same time, you're also speaking to hundreds of your fellow community members, and you can also potentially influence them as well. So just with one comment, one question at a town hall, you can really have a pretty big impact. And this is why we really prioritize trying to get activists to attend these town halls. And in this photo, you can see one of these very brave activists. This is a high school student in Bend, or at the time was a high school student. This was a few years ago. And she was advocating for stronger river and public lands protections at a Senator Wyden town hall. And because of her advocacy and because of many other people around the state advocating for their favorite rivers, Senator Wyden introduced the River Democracy Act, which is one of our priority public lands legislation that we're working on right now. So this is just one example of how someone made a big difference at a town hall. To sign up for these or to find out about when these are occurring, you can sign up for your legislators' newsletters and emails. You can just do that on their website. Also, feel free to reach out to me. This is my email here on the screen. If you live in Oregon and you want to be notified about town halls in your area, or about some town hall tips that I'll talk about more, or suggested questions, talking points, stuff like that. Okay, so on to tips. Casey mentioned at the very beginning how busy it was at the Congresswoman Salinas's town hall last night. I attended Senator Wyden's town hall in Sisters last night. Also very busy. I got there at 5:15 because I knew it was going to be busy, and seats were already filling up. And it was scheduled to start at 6, so I was 45 minutes early. By 5:45, it was pretty much standing room only. So yeah, play it safe. Arrive early, get a good seat. If you do want to ask a question, you will need to sign up when you get there, and you'll likely be given a raffle ticket. And you'll only be able to ask your question if your raffle ticket is called. So there's no real guarantee that you can ask a question. And that's why we encourage people to do other things to make their point seen, such as bringing signs, like you can see in this photo. So something that says protect public lands, something simple like that, that's awesome. Or if you have shirts that, say something similar, that can help as well. And again, if you show up early, it's also a great time to maybe talk to some staff of the representative, talk to other advocates as well. If you do get called on, it's always helpful to start with a thank you if you can, and if the representative deserves it. But that's just because, we want to hold our representatives accountable, of course, for when they do bad things, but we also want to thank them and encourage them when they do good things so they continue to do good things. One way to make it fun, go with friends, family, other activists. You can have a sign making party beforehand. And then also, if everyone in your group is planning to ask a question on a similar topic, that just raises the chances that one of you will be called on to ask that question. And if you aren't selected, again, you can talk to staff afterwards, or like the next day, call their office, and you can raise your concerns there, ask your question there. And like everything else, all of these tips and more can be found on our activist toolkit on our website. Thank you, Casey. So the next thing you can do is meeting with your legislators, actually meeting them face to face. This is often called lobby meetings. So this is a great way to influence your elected leaders on a specific issue or a policy. And just a quick note, I'm mostly talking about our elected representatives, so like members of Congress, state legislators. They can be local elected officials too. But you can also meet with agencies as well. So for example, like your local Forest Service district office, you can meet with them, have a lobby meeting with them. And this is really impactful because, meeting face to face with them really allows you and your issue to stand out and kind of puts a face to the issue. Of course, when we meet people in person, we're much more likely to remember that conversation and that person over like an email or a phone call. And these meetings, they can be virtual, sometimes locally if your legislator is in your town or district, or you can travel to Salem, or wherever your capital is in your state, or Washington, D.C. for our members of Congress. So if you want to attend a lobby meeting, you have two main options. There's the DIY version. You can schedule it yourself, do it yourself. And to do this, you just want to call the office that you want to meet with, and you can request a meeting. Some legislators on their websites, they might have like a meeting request scheduling form that you can use as well, but you can always just call them as well. The other option is you can join a lobby day organized by an organization that you trust and that works on issues that you care about. So just last week, you can see in this photo, this is a bunch of activists that joined us and some of our partners in Salem, Oregon, in our state capital, to lobby for state wildlife issues. Super fun day lobbying there. So yeah, if you're interested in joining a lobby day or lobbying yourself, feel free to reach out to us. We've done it a lot. We have a lot of tips. Or if you live in a different state, find one of your local grassroots advocacy organizations, reach out to them. Next slide, please. And just some quick tips on lobby meetings. I don't have to go through all of these, but the main points I want to make, the most important thing is you really want to make a very clear ask at these lobby meetings. So that's what you want the legislator to do, support this, oppose this. For example, if you're meeting with Senator Wyden, you can say, please, pass the River Democracy Act, please oppose the Fix Our Forests Act, etc. It's always good to send a follow-up email thanking whoever you met with, whether it's the legislator or their staff. And then in that, you can reiterate the importance of the issue you were talking about and your ask as well. And one more point I want to make, I saw that, we have folks from all over. Great news is, even if you don't live in Oregon, if in the US, we all have elected representatives, senators, members of Congress. So you can, meet with them, call them, send them emails. And all of our voices really matter right now, and this pressure really helps. But if you have a Republican member of Congress, your voice might carry extra weight right now. And that's just because, of course, they're in charge of Congress. The Republicans have control of the Senate and the House. And we'll need some Republicans, to stand strong for public lands, for these environmental laws as well. So if that is your case, then yeah, your voice is very important right now. And again, feel free to reach out to us if you need any help, want any tips on this, or your local organizations.
Awesome.
And I'll pass it back off to Casey.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tammy. As Andrea Salinas said yesterday in Salem or in McMinnville, she said she just needs 3 Republicans. So if you are in a Republican district, make it one of yours. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Phoenix. Thank you so much, Tammy.
Okay, so I know that felt like a lot, and there was a lot of things that we were throwing at you that you can do. So I want to reiterate that everyone has a place in this. If you're someone who's really confident with public speaking, show up to your town hall. If you're someone who really enjoys social media, do the social media posts. If you're someone who's always enjoyed writing, do the letter to your editor. You don't have to do all of them. All of us pitching in here and there makes a big difference. I know it feels like shouting into the void lately, but your voice really does make a difference, or there wouldn't be all of these efforts to remove public comment from our all of this stuff going on, and all this effort to remove public comment periods and public input shows that it makes a difference, or they wouldn't care to remove it. So just a note there. And we're here to help you understand the issues. So I saw a bunch of people asking for resources. You are going to get the slides sent to you, but for those of you that just want to know right away, OregonWild.org. And on our top menu, I'm looking at it right now to make sure I'm saying it right. There's a take action, and underneath it, there's 3 buttons. There's an action center, there's a get involved, and there's an activist toolkit. So the action center has a bunch of different ways that you can get involved with us, from simply going on a hike with us in these webinars to our next lobby day. I don't think we have one up, but if we did, it would be there. Get involved is going to show you all the different campaigns we have going on. So we have the River Democracy Act going on. We have a Stop Extinction campaign. So you can see which one of those you are really drawn to and find the talking points on them. I saw somebody asked about talking points. And then the activist toolkit. And that's going to have a lot of what we just shared is in the activist toolkit. There's a section on social media. There's a section on writing, like, letters to the editor and stuff like that. So that's all there for you to find. And so just take a deep breath. And I had a quote that I really wanted to share that's on the next page. I'm just going to go ahead and read it and let it speak for itself. But my heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. That's by Adrienne Rich. And if anyone's interested, it's the front page of this book, All We Can Save, which is about all we can save. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there with that quote of, like, we do feel like we've lost a lot, but there's still stuff that we can save, and every little bit counts.
Thank you, Phoenix. I would pull it back up, but I want to see all of your faces here. So thank you so much. I'm going to open it up to questions and answers, which there's a poem about that, but we won't go into that one. It is a good poem, though. As long as y'all are here with us, we're going to try to answer questions. We may see people dropping off, and that's okay. The activist toolkit and resources are really the place to be, and you'll see those in a follow-up email. All right. Can you address the second cancellation of the public engagement meetings that were to kick off the NEPA process for the revised Blue Mountain Forest Plan? Is this forestalling because of the attack on NEPA process? Whew. Sammy, Lauren, Victoria?
So I have not been following that as well as some of the other issues like the Northwest Forest Plan. I'm more focused on West Side issues, but we have an East Side activist who does track all of those issues. And just because the public engagement sessions were canceled by this administration does not mean that they get to dodge the NEPA process. So the presentation I gave on NEPA earlier, pointing to how those CEQ regulations have been withdrawn, um, all of that does not impact the fact that this statute is still law. So they still have to follow NEPA's direction. It's just the administration sending out as much confusion and pulling back things like you have to consider climate change, environmental justice, indigenous ecological knowledge, all of these things that the previous administration had in there that were great and like clarified direction and ensured that all agencies were on the same page. That's gone now, but the rules are still there. And so revising that forest plan still has to follow NEPA. There still has to be a comment period and opportunities for public engagement and accountability with the Forest Service. So I am sorry those engagement opportunities got canceled though.
Yeah, and thank you for being aware of them. Um, the next question is from John. Is there a stateswide, so I'll interpret that as national, legal team ready to sue over violations to the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Forest Service agreements on forest management?
Um,
And actually, I think this is really Lauren's knowledge base.
uh, so the executive orders that came out did not, break the law yet. Executive orders don't like require any immediate changes. They're like, you shall study this, you shall propose legislation for this, you shall implement these proposals, review these regulations, and figure out which ones can be rolled back. All of that is setting the stage for massive rollbacks, but it didn't do it immediately. And so there are a lot of people watching very closely to see what happens with those executive orders, to see when the mistake happens and the law is broken. And given what we've seen so far from this administration, I'm confident it's going to happen. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. I think it does. The next one that we're gonna like work through these. So, what is the definition, Lauren, of national security?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And I think that it is a little, I don't have a direct answer, but I think that is a little bit ridiculous to say that timber production is a threat to national security. I mean, are we using timber from federal forests to build our warships to sail the open seas? Unclear. So yeah, it's a little bit of a leap there, but you can understand where they're trying to go with this, to say that this is a critical aspect of our economy that absolutely will threaten national security if it's limited in any way. So we have to log it all immediately. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a direct, concise
You know, I think you did great. Where do Melissa asks, where do private citizens see where timber sales are being announced in order to comment through the NEPA process? And I think all of you know the answers on this one. Victoria's going for it. Maybe not.
I'll go for it. Sure. So I would say, honestly, the easiest way to plug in when we find a really bad logging sale, we will let you know. Sometimes these documents are really hard and wonky and policy heavy and really technical, and it's really hard to kind of like weed through that unless you're already deep in the weeds. But we're always tracking these really bad logging sales that are happening here, and we've got an excellent staff of attorneys and just folks that have like so much history and knowledge of what exactly to look for, and they help write talking points and things like that. So all of these projects are going to be posted on the Federal Register when it's time to comment on them. Their systems are super antiquated and weird and hard to navigate, but we have a ton of resources for that too. So You can find it by checking out the Federal Register. But also you can keep an eye on our website, because when we have some projects that we know need an immediate response, we'll be on it and we'll make sure that we get that information and resources out to you too.
Tammy, do you want to add anything?
No, Victoria covered it. Just want to say you can sign up for like email alerts from your local national forest, and they'll send you out, proposed projects that they're doing if you want to be a nerd about it. But as Victoria said, we're all happy to be the nerds for you.
And I just want to add that all across Oregon and other states, there are people, grassroots activists, folks who live in the forest who know what's happening, and they flag us on important or scary timber sales that are maybe coming up or years away from happening. So you could be one of those too, and probably some of you are. This next one is from Armin, and I will say, just like massive hugs here. Do you have any advice for federal land management employees? For example, Armin is like, I know ESA, NEPA, and other laws pretty well, 27 years with the BLM and US Forest Service. Thank you for your service.
I'll hop in here. Well, first, thank you. And if you're currently still working with the federal government, hold the line. I know you guys are getting lots of emails about retiring early and that kind of stuff. And so those of us that aren't in government appreciate you guys staying and working through that pretty tough climate to be in. And second, I would say talk to people who aren't at the dinner table, and your friends and your family. Tell them what NEPA is and tell them what the ESA is, and share your knowledge, because I know sometimes it can be, especially with the federal government, it can be hard to be vocal in public spaces about your opinion. I used to work for the government, if you can't tell. So I would say talk to people. That feels really, really simple, but something really big that you can do that has a bigger impact than you think is have conversations with people and let the people in your life know what ESA is and what NEPA is and why these things are important and what these executive orders are doing and what you're experiencing right now and the weird emails that you're getting on a weekly basis.
I also want to
Awesome.
add that if you are a federal employee, all of the different action opportunities that we talked about, it's very much storytelling based, like sharing your story on social media, writing letters to the editor, and then speaking with your elected officials directly as well. They want to hear your personal stories. And if you're in the federal government working through all of this craziness that's happening right now, they definitely want to hear from you and hear your story. And it's going to carry an awful lot of weight. So I would say it's even more important for folks like you to lend that story and make sure that other people know what's going on too.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Jennifer asks, from the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, we have some great organizations for state lands, which I know about. But do you know of any organizations similar to Oregon Wild in Washington state? Yes, you do.
Well, Casey, you lived in Washington, so maybe you should take this on.
I did other things in Washington. How about
I I can take a stab at it. We work with partners all across the country on these issues. I don't know of an exact equivalent to Oregon Wild. We are like a weird hybrid of a very policy heavy organization and a very grassroots focused organization. So we do a lot of like this sort of education and here's how you get involved. Conservation Northwest is a partner we work with regularly on national policy issues, and they do track forest plan revisions on the ground. They are tracking stuff at the national level. They aren't quite as grassrootsy as us, but they absolutely have action alerts and ways to get engaged that go out. So that's one example. And maybe we can email out some other ones
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But the next question is, do you have a list of local advocacy groups? And we'll work on making sure that there's these things in the follow-up email, especially since there's folks from all across the country here tonight. I did want to add, it's not a question, but from DJ regarding advocacy, I want to mention that I'm researching podcasts to email with my perspectives and suggesting they discuss those issues. That's right. We didn't have podcasts, I don't think, on these lists, but good call. I hear that, people listen to them. I listen to songs in my head, and so I don't want to have other people talking on top of that. Another person notes that I am kind of an asking about the nuances of social media and the role of social media in informing the public about particular issues, noting that they've gone to more old school methods and like email and texting because they don't want to alert people who may be opposing their particular viewpoint. Um, do you want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about this? Just the nuances of social media versus other forms of like amplifying messages.
Yeah. So I like to think of social media too as an education tool. A lot of it, right? Like these are 30-second. I mean, you can do 3-minute videos, but I'm gonna be honest, I'm a social media person and I struggle sitting through those 3-minute videos. Um, it's a really crash course on it, right? So I do, yeah, it's really great to get that education out there, but getting into that, like the surveillance and the fact that these, like Instagram is owned by Meta. And there is a lot of AI worked into there. It's a hard balance. I honestly don't have a full answer to it. I do really like that the comment mentioned using like email and stuff like that to organize people if you don't want to like alert. And I think if anyone's safety is that concerned, and that is something that really needs to be considered if you're organizing something around safety, especially if you're advocating for something that really puts marginalized groups at the front or puts them in the spotlight. I do think you want to be a lot more reserved about that kind of stuff. But what you can do instead is educate about the facts on it, right? So maybe you don't feel comfortable saying, hey, a whole bunch of us are showing up here to do this thing, but you to talk about old growth, but you could make a video talking about what old growth is and why it's important. So it's a hard line to walk, and I struggle with it too. And I saw someone put that they deleted Facebook and Instagram also in the comments. And I think if you want to delete Facebook and Instagram, there's so many other ways for you to get involved. If you feel better deleting it, delete it. Like I commend you for your self-control also. But yeah, it's a hard line to walk, and I think it's an individual thing about how safe you feel about posting whether or not you're going to be somewhere. Oregon Wild, we're a whole organization. We're still individual people, but we have a little bit more security there than like a single individual saying, this is where I'm going to be and advocating for this, and therefore letting all these other people see who might not agree with you and might not be very safe people. It's a hard line to walk, and cybersecurity and something, and not just like your security on the internet, not necessarily your computer security with viruses, is just something to think about and try and walk line. I hope that kind of touched on it, but like as the commenter said, like that's a really nuanced thing. It's hard to hop into.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, old school email newsletters. Also, when I don't live in a city, but when I'm walking in cities, I always look at the telephone poles to see what people put up on them. And literally, like, I learn things from what's put up on the telephone poles. Do you know what I'm talking about with the little pull the things off? Okay, thank you. Lauren, can you please tell us how to find the federal changes that you listed, from the Trump executive orders through Fix Our Forests and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have action alerts on pretty much all of these initiatives on our website. So that is definitely one resource to use. And again, other environmental organizations, they'll be tracking these sort of things as well. So getting involved with your local group or national group to keep track of all the really bad stuff, I think is maybe the easiest way to go. And I saw in the chat there was a comment as well, or a question about like a toolkit specifically for these things that are happening, like the Fix Our Forests Act or the executive orders. And we have toolkits that we've pulled together for messaging, engagement, all talking points, all of these things for the executive orders and for Fix Our Forests Act. So we have all of those resources available for folks who want to get engaged.
Awesome. Thank you. And there's also some notes in the question and answer section about what we might have on websites and social media to help people tag their representatives. And just want to put that out there. There's another question about what do you think about talking points? And I think Phoenix, can you, well, I guess really anybody here could take a stab at it. I say that for me personally, talking points are kind of the way I ground a message that I'm consistent with the other folks that I'm working in a coalition with, but I always tell a story, and the talking points just gets woven in. Other thoughts?
Yeah, so I originally unmuted for the first person about
Oh,
tagging, but I can also touch base on talking points. So we have a character limit in our bio, and tagging all of the representatives would definitely use that all. But if you Google like your senator, your representative's name, and then social media, a lot of times they'll list it on their website. And also on the Instagram, they'll have like the verified check, and it'll say, you know, the official Instagram of Senator Wyden, and so Googling their names goes a huge way. Also, someone asked earlier about advocacy groups in the Washington area, and I saw somebody was in Arizona. Also, just Googling like Northern Arizona advocacy, public lands, you know, nonprofit, enter, and you'll get like a whole list. That's actually one of the ways that I got my job here, was Googling Oregon advocacy groups and finding the job posting. So Google goes a really long way. So that's what I was unmuting for, was to touch on those two things. But yeah, underlining something Victoria said earlier and Casey just mentioned, storytelling. You don't want to sound, I mean, to make it relevant, you don't want to sound like AI wrote your pitch or your letter to the editor. Yeah, like you don't want to sound like a robot. A lot of us have stories that go along with this. And we have stories about how this has affected a place that we live in, or places that we've lost, or places that we don't want to lose and aren't protected. And the story can, it doesn't have to be this major story about I loved this place growing up and you know it got torn to the ground and now it's not there anymore. If you don't have that story, the story of you going hiking with your kids in that forest, that's still a story, and you can find ways to weave your talking point into it. So I would say go to our toolkit, find our talking points, think of a memory that you have that made you want to comment on this, and find where your talking points hit that story.
And yeah, just piggybacking off of that, like I think we've probably mentioned this a few times throughout the webinar, but you don't have to be an expert to do any of these things. And like if you're meeting with your legislators, they don't expect you to be an expert. And all you really need to do is care about these issues. If you have some personal connection, that's great. And of course, you know, it's good to have some talking points and facts like in your back pocket to bring up. But really, the most important thing is just that you care and you know you want to advocate for these issues. And just remember that our elected representatives, you know, they work for us, and it's their job to listen to us and our concerns.
Yeah. A great question. Thank you from Lauren is which representatives and local legislators as well are not currently fighting for those issues, but you feel could be convinced with enough public pressure? Yeah.
So the Fix Our Forest Act passed the House, and unfortunately it had bipartisan support. And Democrats voted in favor of it. And you can look that up online, and we can maybe include that link with the toolkit that goes out. And so you can see which Democrats voted in favor of Fix Our Forests. And if you have some in your states, it's a good idea to reach out to them and let them know that that was not cool, because the Fix Our Forest Act mirrors what is in the executive orders. It is very much in line with what is happening with the NEPA regulations being attacked. And it's, you know, it's just a whole scale attack on our forest lands. And so here in Oregon, we had 2 Democrats vote in favor of the Fix Our Forest Act, Representative Bynum, who is a first term representative and maybe isn't as up to speed on some of these issues around forests here in Oregon, and Representative Hoyle, who voted against Fix Our Forest the first time it came up in the House, and then switched her vote under the Trump administration, which is not the greatest. So those I think would be great folks to reach out to if you're here in Oregon.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to take, there's a there's a long comment about being in a conservative county and showing up to a local elected officials, whether it's a county commissioner or a city council, and kind of the safety and then the strategy around getting your message across without putting people in safety or having your elected officials discount you immediately before you even open your mouth to speak. And I will say, like, I literally was on the dais. I know exactly one how you felt and what was effective. And really, it was the consistent showing up of 1, 2, 10 people. When 10 people showed up with not matching clothes at the back of the room, we knew that something was up, and we are like, "What's going on?" And then as soon as somebody told us, we were like, "Oh, we need to find out more about this, because if 10 people are willing to show up in the middle of the day, something is really amiss," and we would get our staff on it immediately. So, and this is in a conservative county, just to flag for you. So I really I second that one. Um,
And again,
oh,
always do things that feel safe to you personally
yes,
when engaging in these spaces.
yes, thank you, Lauren. Darcy mentions our Republican congressperson from Eastern Washington tells us that any opposition to Trump's executive orders is because we are radical liberals, and he will only represent those who voted for him. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, that person doesn't represent only the people who voted for them. They represent all their constituents, and you still have the right to show up to town halls and let them know how you feel about that. Also, call them every day. Do all the things that we talked about throughout this webcast, because you still are their constituent, and you know they should still listen to you.
Also, you can do a sign-on letter that spells out all of your concerns and the fact that you've been ignored, and get, a couple hundred of friends and neighbors to sign on to that, and then just go ahead and publish that in one of the papers they care about. And that's also a good way to let them know they should probably do better.
Yeah, thank you. That's right. There are plenty of Sorry, Victoria.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add that what they're saying to the public might not necessarily be reflective of what is actually working and what's not. In my mind, if they're coming out and saying we don't want to listen to any more people from the left, I think that means the left needs to ramp up the pressure because it is working. They're trying to discourage you from taking action, but don't let that work. Yeah, using other tools like writing letters to the editor in papers that could, I don't know, maybe embarrass them that they were called out in such a public way. All of these things really matter, and it'll add up. At the end of the day, they do need to continue winning elections, which means they need to be popular with the people. And so, yeah, don't let up just because they're asking you to.
Yeah, Lauren.
Casey, can I answer one question? I saw in the chat that
Oh,
someone
yeah.
brought up the fact that the interim rule that CEQ issued withdrawing the NEPA regulations, that is still open for public comment period through March 27th. And yes, that is an open public comment period. And you should absolutely submit a comment pushing back on the fact that they're no longer considering environmental justice and climate change in those regulations. So it is absolutely, you should engage in every public comment period that you can. Um, there's also open public comment period right now for the national security executive order that is open, I believe, until April 1st. Victoria, correct me if I'm wrong. But for that public comment period, again, that's kind of like a weird fit, but we're letting the Trump administration know why our federal forests are important for national security as opposed to just timber. So clean air, clean water, fighting climate change, these are all things that actually are critical to our national security. So letting them know that is a good thing.
Awesome, thank you. Um, Jeannie notes that her state senator, or their state senator, Starr, introduced a bill to transfer as much federal land as possible to the state of Oregon. And this doesn't seem very likely, but what approach to Senator Starr would be appropriate? I will just say that that's also my state senator, and we should talk. I'll put my email address into the follow-up email. Happy to go over things with you, but definitely let Senator Starr know that you don't like that. Um, Liza asks, can you point to any united efforts to fight the changing policies regarding forests with other environmental nonprofits and groups kind of across the country? And yes, I'm sure you can.
Uh,
Don't everybody unmute at once.
Sorry, Casey, I didn't hear the very first part of that question. Was it about the coalitions that are forming to track all
Yeah,
this stuff?
united efforts to fight.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oregon Wild is part of a coalition called the Climate Forest Coalition. And they are tracking every single thing that the Trump administration is doing related to forests on federal lands. And we'll be creating toolkits. That's where the Fix Our Forest toolkit came from, and where the executive order toolkit came from was from that coalition. And there absolutely are people working together on these issues, both nationally and regionally. Northwest Forest Plan is also undergoing an amendment process right now. And so there are groups of people who are tracking that very closely as well across California, Oregon, and Washington as sort of a regional example. So yes, environmental groups are absolutely working together on defense, and sharing resources and figuring out how to be most effective on these issues.
I was like, I'm pointing at Victoria. Do you want to add anything? Okay, that sounds good. So, oh, Phoenix is actually answering the comment about national media. There you go. I was about to add that one.
Yeah, I was gonna say just a quick note. I wanted to amplify. Someone, if you are a federal employee who's recently lost their job, there are a lot of news organizations, national and statewide, that would like to hear your story if you're willing to share it. Oregon Wild does have connections to some of those people, so please reach out to us. Reach out to us. This person, Sharon, also said the New York Times specifically asked for stories of federal workers who have lost their jobs. So just throwing that out there.
I'll also
And
mention that, sorry, Senator Wyden and Merkley are also interested in hearing your stories and trying to help out.
yeah. My last thing that I was going to add is I have, for the past month, I've been on or either been on the panel or watched every single one of these. And normally we have like at least a 50% drop off rate when we get to the questions. And you guys have all stayed here. And I just appreciate everyone being so passionate about this. This is the most people that I've seen stay for the whole Q&A session. So thank you all for your passion.
Yeah, tremendous, tremendous. A lot of the last comments or the last questions are really comments. Thanks to the panelists. I did want to ask. We all interact with federal employees and in federal programs all the time. Do the panelists have any specific stories that they want to uplift or amplify or point out particular concerns?
Do you, Casey?
I mean, I'm worried for all of my friends. I particular so I thank you, Lauren. I wasn't going to talk, but I have I do trail work in the Silver Falls State Park, Greenway parks along the Willamette River in the Coast Range, and then I work with like wonderful a lot of retired federal employees who then carry saws into the Willamette National Forest and the Mount Hood National Forest to do volunteer trail crew work. And in fact, this summer, unfortunately, the entire ranger program in the Willamette National Forest was fired, leaving the trail crew volunteers to be the only ones to oversee, watch out for the trails and the people on the trails in all of the Willamette National Forest. And to me, that's a travesty because it's really amazing places, very special places that deserve the attention and respect of the federal government. They're places that all of us love, and a lot of people put a lot of sweat and stub toes and a lot of sawdust into keeping accessible for all of us. And especially the accessibility seems to be very, I don't know, to me is very valuable, is that not all of us can climb over every log to get to a special place. And the folks who put a lot of effort into it, I think deserve a lot more respect and better treatment than the federal administration has given them. All right. With that pause, thank you, panelists, for joining us today. Thank you for all of your work. I see it. I get to see it every day, the amazing work that you do. Thank you to the audience who've joined us today. Your questions are amazing. I know some of you out there, not all of you. And I really thank you for the work that you do and the hope that you hold in really scary times. And you keep our work, you help our work happen too. So any closing thoughts from our panel before we send you out into the night?
Just a quick anecdote about having conversations with people. I used to be a park ranger and I did dark sky tours, and I had a couple come to one of my dark sky tours, specifically with the purpose of like getting in an argument with me about whether or not the earth was flat. And I was in uniform, so I had to handle that conversation politely. That couple stayed for my whole talk and became one of my most regular people coming to my science talks. They started volunteering with us, and just having a respectful conversation, as hard as that is nowadays. And I'm not saying have a respectful conversation with someone who doesn't respect you, but if someone is willing to have a conversation with you, it goes a long way. And I think about that couple a lot whenever I like don't want to engage with comments, or don't want to talk to family members who I know I'm going to get in a fight with about. I think about those people, and I think about that I'm a person who's in a position of privilege and safety to have those conversations. And so it's important for me to have those conversations, and that I have proof that they really do work. And you can change people's minds just by being real with them. So I just want to throw that one out there at the end.
I have something to add. So I think, I mean, everyone knows that these are some really like scary and intense times that we're entering. And it's really hard to measure success. Like we talked about a lot of different actions that you can take to kind of move the needle on these issues. And when you're not seeing a direct change come immediately from that, it's kind of hard to stay motivated sometimes. And you're definitely going to be fielding people who are telling you that what you're doing doesn't matter. And I just want to say, please resist falling into that trap. It all matters. It's really this pressure cooker that we're creating together that is going to lead to the changes that we need to see. It's not one action, it's not one person. It's really all of us putting our best foot forward and participating in whatever way that we can. And it's really important to take care of your community and your friends because, you know, this is corny and cliche, but this is a marathon and not a sprint. So make sure you're taking care of yourself and from each other. We've been here before and we can get through this again. So yeah, don't listen to the people telling you that what you have to contribute to this movement doesn't matter, because it very much all does. And it'll all pay off soon.
I don't think I can beat that. So
No, I'm not gonna
let's
try and
leave it
follow
there.
those two.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm struggling with the technology of pulling up the quote, but we'll make sure it's in the follow-up email, because you don't need to see me at 7:30 at night on the West Coast struggling with the share feature when you've heard these beautiful words. Phoenix, would you lead us out with the poem again? Just read it out, and then I'm going to
Yes,
close us down. Thank you
absolutely.
all so much for joining us
And
today.
really quick, actually, thank you to all the folks on the East Coast, because I saw we had some people there. I know it's late for you.
Sorry as I read this poem that there might be a dog squeaky toy in the background. So this is by Adrian Rich. If anybody wants to look it up, Adrian Rich is the name of the poet. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world.